Okay guys, so in this video we are going to cover the big three validation systems that everybody's talking about, so let's get into it. So we're going to talk about JWT, we're going to talk about Oauth, and we're going to talk about session, because basically I got a subscriber question, Frederick, can you make a video about these three concepts, right? So we're going to have to keep it, I'm not going to make it too high level, but we're going to keep it fairly high level because we can't get into the nitty-gritty details of every single detail about this, because then I'm going to be here for hours. But let's get into it. So let's start by talking about what is a session. So a session is just you can think of it as a high-level concept that where basically a session is a way for the server to know that you are who you claim you are, that the server has seen you before. Because remember, HTTP is a stateless protocol, so every time you make a connection to the server, there's no way for the server to know that you've been there before. And that's where a session comes in. This is where you include something we call a session header, or a cookie, if you will, a session cookie. And that cookie is just something that is included, something like a piece of text that represents you as a validated, or as it doesn't have to be a validated user, just a user or a client that the server has seen before. It's kind of like going into a club or a carnival or something like that. You get a hand stamp that proves that you have paid or that you've been there before, they've seen you, so that you can get back in when you want to, right? It's the exact same principle. So the way that the reason why we usually use this is because when you want to have restricted resources like private pages and things that only a specific user should be able to get to, then you need a way to make sure that you just, because if you don't have it, then anybody could just say, hey, you know what, I want to go to this user's private page and just change the ID, because anybody can act without a session, there's no way for you to know who is contacting you, so you have to show whatever is there, regardless of who's making the request, right? So that's where a cookie comes in. So I'm going to just show you the basics of this. I've created this little server here where I have a few applications, because basically I'm just running them all on different ports here because I'm lazy, and we're just going to walk through each of these applications, right? So let's look at the session app first and foremost. So first and foremost, we are creating a Redis connection to, because basically we need a database of some sort. This is where the session ID comes in. So there's two parts of it. So one part is the cookie that we set in the user's browser, which is just, as I said, it's just like a hand stamp. It's something that represents this user. And when they make a request, we need some database or something to store the information that we need that is associated with that hand stamp. And usually that's going to be a user ID, or it's going to be something that is like, say, if you have a shopping cart or something like that, information that is just valid for this session. And a session is usually just a time of period, an arbitrary time. It can be an hour, it can be several days, it can be 20 minutes, that dictates how long that hand stamp or that token that we gave them is valid, or rather the cookie, if you will. So what we do here is that we use Express, as you can see, and then we use Express Session, which is just a way for us to set up the session. And here we set a secret, and the secret is just the secret, because our token, it's very important that we encrypt our token, so that when we actually submit it, nobody just can read it in plain text or anything like that. So that's what we do here. We just encrypt it, so it's a random value that doesn't make sense to a human. And then we give a name to the session cookie, and then we say that we're not going to resave it, we're just not going to save it, well, we're going to save it uninitialized, which means that basically as soon as you make a request to the server, we're actually going to just create a session value, a cookie for you immediately, but you don't have it mapped to anything. And we're going to set it to secure false, because I'm not using HTTPS, even though I should, but I'm lazy in demo world. And then we have our Redis store, which is just going to contain the store information where we actually store the session itself. We're going to look at that in just a moment. And here are our endpoints. So the flow is very simple. So I have this restricted resource, this thing that I don't want anybody to just be able to see, right? And then I check. If the request that I send in, does that have a session, all right? If it does, then I'm going to try and get the user ID that is on that session, and then I'm going to grab the user. If there isn't a user, then we redirect back to a logging, because that means that this session doesn't have an associated user. And if there is no session, then we also go to login. And then here we will just return the string if the user is actually logged in. And then in the login case, we will just grab a static HTML file, something like this. like login here, and this is a little bit, there's a form here where we can see that, okay, the user is going to post to login. They're going to send the username and the password that they have, and that's pretty much it, really. So when that happens, we're going to hit here, and then we're going to extract that information. We're going to go to our magical user service, get user, and we're just going to try to find a user that has these two things. And then we basically check, is there a user and is there a session? And if there is a session, then we set the user ID to, or the user ID property on the session to the user ID, user's ID, and then we redirect back to the original page, or rather to the page like that we're trying to log into, right? In this case, we just hard-coded it, but you could include like information about, okay, they tried to go here, redirect them to that place and stuff like that. And otherwise, we're just going to say that the username or the password is invalid. And we say one or the other because it's very bad if you say if it is the username or the password, because that means that if a hacker tries to get to you, this user account, they know which was incorrect. So if they get the username right and you say that the password was wrong, then you can just keep the username and keep on brute forcing the password. So here is my little amazing application that we go into, and we say here, as you notice now, I tried to go to the root of our application, but I didn't. I was redirected to the login page. And basically what I now do is that I say foo, and I say bar, and here I am. Now I'm redirected back to the original page, and I can actually see the content that was restricted from me. And the reason why this works, we're not going to look at that, we're going to look at this, is because of this. Remember what I was saying, we were looking at earlier? We have this cookie that is called my session that holds this random value that represents to my server that this browser or this client, this user, has been here before. And it's on me to make sure that in my database I include the information that is needed in order to have this as a valid thing, right? So if I do this and I just do that, you see that now without the cookie I'm back to 0 again, because now there's no connection anymore. I've just created a new, I basically just got a new session cookie because I created a new session, and that session hasn't been validated. Now if we have a bit of a look here, let's clean this up a bit. Let's go and say docker CLI, and I say scan 0. You'll see here that here are my sessions. And I am fairly confident that, no, let's say this is probably the session here. So let's get that. So here you see that there is some information regarding, this is like what the cookie, this is like some of the information that is actually included into the cookie. This is me in Redis now basically just checking what I have in the database. And oh, sorry, this was the one. So here you can see that I have actually set the user ID on my session, and this is the information, the meta information that is needed by Express session to validate this basically. So that's all it is. And that is pretty much how a session works. If I drop the database, all the sessions are gone, and all of a sudden everybody has to log in again when they try to access a restricted resource. Right, so that's a session. That's the basics. So basically, as we saw here, the flow is the user tries to go access a private page. Session cookie is missing. We send the user to the login page. The user logs in. We create a session cookie and set it in the browser. User tries to access a private page, like the page again, and this time they have a session cookie, and then they actually get to go to that page. Cool. Now let's talk about JWTs. So JWTs, or JSON Web Tokens, is another way to encode information, or rather to submit information of some sort. It doesn't have to be credentials, but it's most commonly used for credentials. And this is a form of session management as well. It's different from a cookie, but it's a very similar sort of thing. It's just a very specific way of doing it. Now usually a session cookie is something that is very tightly coupled to a browser, because I mean, you could do it without a browser, but it's just that the standards in the browser are very well supported for using a specific, like a cookie, a session cookie. That's basically the motivation behind this. But a JWT could work as well. It's just that using a JWT in the browser is a lot more work, because basically the browser doesn't allow you to just do what with a cookie. You can store the cookie to the file system, and you could use something like local storage to do the same thing with a JWT, but it's not really a long persisted thing, right? It's not. I mean, if the user closes their browser, then or does something else weird, and that's not really in line with what you're expecting, you can't be guaranteed that this JWT is going to stick around. So it is possible to treat a JWT in the same way as a session or like a session cookie, but it's not a good fit for the same problem. What it is a good fit for is when you want to do API calls between different services. So let's say that you have one API that needs to connect to another API to get some information or validate or do something like that. You're doing everything for either AJAX or just something like that, right? Then a JWT could be a good, it could be a nice way of doing it. So this is a JWT. This is an encoded JWT, which a bunch of information. Now notice that a JWT it has three sections. It has a header, a body, and a signature. And these three pieces of information are fairly important to keep track of, because if we look at the header and the body, these things are just basics for encoded information. And this is one of the biggest beginner mistakes that you can make. You have to be very clear about this. There is no encryption here. I can reverse engineer this in a second or two. I can get all the information that you just sent in the JWT at any time. Anybody can do it. And that's not the intention of a JWT. And the intention of a JWT is to send information that is okay to share, like a user ID or something like that, over a network, and be guaranteed that when it arrives, the information hasn't been changed. So as an example, the header section, I'm going to show you how to decode this in just a moment, but the header section here is going to contain the type of algorithm and the type of token that we're actually submitting, so that when we receive the token in the server, we know what algorithm was used to sign it, and then we need to decode it, or rather verify the signature, which is this section here, in order to be certain that the information in the body has not changed since the signature or the signing of this token. And that's the reason why this is so important, is because if I'm a hacker and I send you a JWT that is going to represent my session or the proof that I am allowed to access this user's information, if I change the user ID to whatever I want, then I could, if you're not able to validate that I didn't mess with the information somehow, then I could validate myself to anything, right? And that's exactly what we want here. Or you could do the same thing for expirations, and the IAT stands for issued at, and EXP is just for expires. When this token is no longer valid. This is basically the same thing as saying this is how long this token is allowed to be around before I need to revalidate. So once again, I want to be super clear on that. This information, this is the body of my JWT. It's just base64. It's super insecure. Do not include passwords or anything like that, because you are going to leak that information, or emails or stuff like that. That's super dangerous. Only include things that you are comfortable with some hacker getting a hold of, because the only promise you have is that the signature is going to guarantee that if somebody changed this number here, it's going to break. That's it. Alright, so let's look at the JWT app. So here we have a GET request, and as you can see here, we're going to log out this information where basically we get the authorization, where the common way of submitting a JWT is to use the authorization header. And so we're going to expect that to be there. And then we're going to do some bit of decoding here, and then we're going to do this. We're going to verify the authentication that we were submitted, like basically the token. We're going to verify that. And we're going to validate it using a secret. There are other ways to verify and sign a JWT, but in this case we're just going to use a simple, a string that represents the secret that needs to be used in order to encode and decode. And then we're going to get back the user ID, and then we're going to get the user. If there is no user, that's not a valid login. Otherwise, yeah, you have a user and you're allowed to be logged in, right? And here is our post method for the login, where we submit a request with the username and the password. We get the user, check if there is a user. If there is one, we sign the user. This is the information we want to include in our JWT, which is just the user ID. We sign it, we set a expiration date of 1 hour, we set the header, authorization header, we set the token on that header, and we also just return the token in the body. You could submit the token in the body or in a header or stuff like that. It doesn't really matter all that much. Cool. So now, if I go and I do this, let's do a curl here. Curl, curly curl. So as we can see here, the curl is just going to post the data, username, foo, and password bar, and we're going to set the content type to JSON. We hit that, and here is our JWT. So we're going to copy paste that, and we're going to do this like so. And then we're basically just going to change this JWT. As you can see here, I'm setting the authorization header to my JWT, and then I'm going to change it to this thing here. I'm going to hit that, and here is, well, here is the proof that this just worked. And here, as you could see here, this is just base64 encoded. This is what we saw earlier. I'm now logging out the information I just sent. So once again, this is not private at all. This is super public information that anybody can access. The only thing that I can promise is that this information has not been tampered with. Cool. So to reiterate on the use case for this is a very, JWTs are useful if you have a trusted system. Let's say you have your own services and you want to add some extra validation. You don't want one of your services to be able to connect to another service without making sure that it's validated and secure and stuff like that. So it's perfect for API to API communication where you have a trusted ecosystem of different services talking to each other. Finally, we're going to talk about Oauth, and Oauth is it's a very broad topic. There's a lot of stuff here, so I'm just going to cover the stuff that you probably are most familiar with, which is the login as something, or login with login with Google, login with Facebook, login with GitHub, whoever you want to log in with. And the basic idea is simply that you have a system that a user is using or want to use. Now, there is information that this user has on a Auth provider account, something like, say, Google. Like, quite a lot of people have a Google account or a GitHub account or something like that, right? So what you basically want is to grab information that that system has on behalf of the user. But in order for you to be able to do that, I mean, Google isn't just going to let any random system go and like grab information about their user. So you have to get the consent to be allowed by the user to do that. They have to give you their consent. Otherwise, you're not allowed to do it. And that's where Oauth comes in. So Oauth is a validation system, or as I said, it doesn't have to be a validation system. You could be getting all kinds of stuff. It doesn't have to be user information. It could be other stuff as well. But it's most common that this is how you interact with it, at least from a user perspective. So the user tries to go into your application, and then you say, hey, you know what? I just want to log in this user, create a session for this user, and I don't want to force them to create an account and like input all their personal information, because I know that Google probably already has that information, or Facebook for sure, hint, hint. And I can get that by just getting the consent. So you send them to a page where they can actually give you that consent, and then you in return get a token that you can use towards Facebook or Google or so forth to grab that information. So the basic flow is user tries to log in, we redirect the user to the Auth provider, which could be one of these big companies, right? And then the Auth provider is going to validate the user because they already have a user account, right? And then they redirect back to us with an access token, because we basically ask for consent to access some of their stuff. It can be to access their email, to get their username, their profile, like their photos. That can be anything that they own that is on the side of Facebook or Google that they have in their systems, right? And then we basically use the access token to get the user information, and then we create a session for the user on our side, because we still need, we need to create a session as well, because that's the way we know that they are logged into our system. So this, I really urge you, like if you're thinking that you're just going to copy paste all of this code that I'm showing you now and just use that in your own Auth thing or do something like that, just don't. It's going to end poorly for you. I have tried to keep this as simple as possible, although I can show you, and that's another video, to do this more seriously in a more production fashion. This is just the gist of it. This is just roughly how it's going to work, and it's by no means production ready code that you can just copy paste. Anywho, So here's our Auth application, and we, as we see here, we have a session here as well. And then we have a get, where we basically say that, all right, we're going to try to get to this information down here, right? So we check, is there a session? If there is a session, we get the user ID, or we try to get the user. If there is no user, we redirect not to ourselves, but to, let's just pretend that this is Google or Facebook or somebody, right? And we say, can you validate this user? And if there is no session, we do the same thing, basically. That's it. So what's now going to happen is that we're going to go over here. We're going to send the user over to this other system, which is the Auth provider system. And here, they have things that work in a fairly similar way. So they have a session system as well of some sort, because they need to know who this user is as well. So if the user, remember now, if the user is already logged into their Facebook account or their Google account, if they already have a session that is valid, they will just directly go to the consent page where they can say, yeah, I'm going to give this other system access to my stuff. But if they're not logged in, they have to log in with their username and password. So this is just a way to potentially save this user some hassle if they have one of these accounts, right? So here we go. We go and we get to the validation part here, where we do the exact same thing as we did in our session example. We basically just try to check if the user has a valid session. If they don't, we send them to the login page. Otherwise, we're going to render out the consent page. So the consent page is just this page here, where we basically say that, hey, I am a user and I'm going to give this other application the right to do something. And we create a code that just represents that this user is, we create a code that is unique to this user or to this request in this session, and we say, all right, when we submit this form, include this code as well. So it's just created that one time and sent it to the user, so we can be certain that they actually saw this page and they consented to the right thing, right? Because we don't want some hacker to show them one page and say, hey, I just give you access to my email, and in fact they're actually giving you access to your wife. So anywho, the create validation code is just, I'll just show you these services just for these. It's not very important, but like, here are the services, the user service. As you can see here, this is just dummy information. You can very briefly glance at it, but it's not really important for the conceptual part of this little tutorial of mine. And then we have an access token, and an access token is usually just a random value, something like, can be anything. And there's a time to live, for how long is it valid, a scope, which we'll touch on that in just a moment. And then we have a created at where it was actually created. And then we have the Auth service, which is this thing here, where I'm just basically hard coding a bunch of information. It's not really important what this does, because we're more conceptual today than we are practical, which is great if we want to go into management or something like that. Anywho, so we're going to post the consent, and then we're going to get the code, and then we're going to check, is this a valid code? And we check the code, and then we go back and we make sure that the user ID and the code is in sync, because they need to be in sync, so that otherwise any random user could just sit there and send consents and try to get an access token, right? And then we create an access token holder, which is just, as we saw, this is just the access token, like the information about the access token. And then we send back the access token. We redirect the user back to the original system. And this information here is, it's all, like, far from the profile, which is that restricted resource I was talking about. This is where you need to get that access token in order to actually get the profile information. This login stuff is like almost identical to how it works in the session example. Finally, here we are. So we get redirected back to this, or the user gets redirected back to this token, an endpoint here that we created. And then we go back, we use this token that we got, and we go and get the profile information that is associated with this token. Now notice that we don't have a user ID or anything like that included here. The reason why we're not specifying which user it is that we want to get the information for is because we don't know that on our side. That information is stored in the Auth provider and connected to this token. So this token is only valid for this user account. There's no way for me to use this token to grab somebody else's user account because it's restricted to this specific user. And that's where the whole idea of scope comes in. Scope is just a string that the token is going to contain, which we can look at that here. So this is just going to be a random string that tries to specify what resources I need access to. And what's commonly going to happen is that the auth provider is going to say, all right, so this system that I have, it tries to get, it wants to get the user's username, and it's going to get the email, and it wants access to change their, I don't know, their date of birth or something like that. Is this okay? And then they will show this consent page and say, hey, these are the things that this system now wants the rights to do on your behalf. Are you okay with this? Sometimes you have the option to make it optional, and sometimes you have to consent completely, stuff of this nature, but it's a little bit more in-depth. Anywho, we just want the profile. So we go and we get the token response, or like the profile response, which is going to contain some data, and it's going to contain the username, because that's all we care about. And now we have the user information that we need to create a session, and then we check, is there a session? If there is one, set the user ID, and then that's basically us redirected back to the restricted resource that they were trying to access. Now, the actual implementation, depending on which API you're using in terms of auth providers, might be more elaborate than this. There could be a few more steps where you have validation codes and some other stuff going on, but this is the bare-bone basic idea of how this works. So, if I go here, I kill this, and I go and I look on this page. Now, notice that I tried to go to 302, or 3002, but I was redirected to 3003/login, and that's exactly what I was saying earlier. So I tried to go here, but what's going to happen is that I don't want that. I want to use the auth system, right? So I'm not going to try to redirect to my own login page. I'm going to redirect to the validation step at the auth provider. So we're going to go to validate in auth provider, which is going to be here, and then we're going to check, do we have a session here? Is this user logged into Google or Facebook or whatever? If they're not, then we're going to use the Oauth provider. The user's going to see the Oauth provider's login system. So here I am at I'm on Google, as you can clearly see, and I say foo and I say bar, and here is the amazing consent page where I don't know what I'm consenting to, but I know that I am. And basically all I have to do now is click accept, and here I am back in the original spot that I was trying to get to, and now I can see the restricted resource. And yeah, that is the basics of how Auth pretty much works. And the thing to take away here is that, as I said, this is probably the thing that you've seen the most, but this is by no means the whole Auth protocol. There's tons of other stuff that you can do with Auth, but that's an entire video series in of itself. So let's recap. Sessions, very, very useful when you have your own standard classic application where you want to restrict some pages on your website or something like that. You ask the user to create a username and a password and like an account or something like that, and then you log them in basically. JWTs, very useful if you want to have like communications between different services, like you have maybe a microservices architecture or something like that, and you have these different APIs that needs to talk to each other. Can be a very useful thing to have if you want to validate things. And finally, Oauth, very useful if you need access to a third party's resources. If there is a system somewhere else that has information that you would like on behalf of a user on your system, then this is a very convenient way of doing this. You can still use a session in the same way, and as I said, the most common way to use Oauth for most people who make applications is that they just want the user profile information so they can create a session for the user, so they don't have to like create an account themselves. But it's not limited to that. Hopefully you found that useful. Have a great day.